Why Linux? Why bother installing Linux when you have Windows in your computer? After all, Windows does everything you need. It plays your games, helps with your productivity, allows you to consume digital content, pay bills, shop, and it does a multitude of other things. It's a fair question, and to be honest, you don't need to install Linux. But the intent of this video isn't to convince you to abandon Windows for Linux. This is an installation guide, so I assume that if you're watching this, you're either curious about Linux or have already made up your mind to install it. But before getting into the installation section of this video, which I'll add a timestamp below in the description, I wanted to take a few moments to give you some information about Linux and more specifically Pop! OS. At the time of producing this video, Pop! Is running on the latest Linux kernel. I believe it's 5.15, and is using GNOME as the default desktop environment. Now, I realize GNOME has fallen out of favor with a large portion of the Linux community, but I personally enjoy it. It's simplistic, clean, functional, and runs smoothly. If you're not a fan of GNOME, you're always free to install and use any of the other desktop environments out there, such as KDE, Mate, and so on. So, a little about Pop! OS. It's produced by a company called System 76, based out of Colorado. They started selling computers with Linux installed in, I think, 2005, and they developed Pop! In 2017. It's extremely user-friendly, easy to install, and as you can see, was designed with gaming in mind. Overall, Linux has come a long way since its initial release back in 1990 or 1991. I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, Pop! Is a testament to just how far Linux has come over the past 30 years. So back to the initial question, why Linux? More so, why Pop? Well, without diving too deep, I wanted to give you a quick comparison of some of the major differences. For one, Pop! Only requires 4 gigabytes of storage to install and run, while Windows requires something toward 80 gigs. That's a pretty considerable difference. 80 gigs is a huge chunk of storage if you're running a 250 or even a 500 gig SSD. Secondly, it's security. Linux in general is much more secure than Windows, as is pretty common knowledge. One of the key points here is that Windows is closed-sourced, which means that Microsoft keeps the source code for Windows under lock and key, while Linux is open source, which means that anyone with a computer or an internet connection can view the source code. It's pretty simple. Now, you'd think that because Linux is open source, it'd be much easier to install malicious software. But the fact is, with so many eyes from around the world working on it, it's actually a lot more difficult to do something like that. Linux isn't owned by any one person, so someone in Japan can add to it while someone in Germany can do the same. And as I said before, with so many people working on it, it's so much more difficult to sneak anything malicious into the source code. Another point to consider is that Linux doesn't spy on you. Again, I don't want to dive too deep here because this is a topic for its own video. Suffice to say for now that you can Google Microsoft's privacy statement and read it for yourself. They freely admit to capturing your data. Again, this is not something Linux does. My final point for consideration is that every paid commercial software app running on Windows, there is a free open source alternative for Linux. And yes, they do run very, very well. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's dive into the installation. Alright, so before we start the installation process, we need to do a little prep work. And for that, we are going to need 3 things. A flash drive with at least 4 gigabyte capacity, the ISO file containing our operating system. And a quick little side note here, for those of you who don't know what an ISO file is, it is a digital exact copy of the data contained on a Blu-ray, a CD, or a DVD, basically optical media. And then we need a flashing software program that will let us take that data contained in the ISO file, flash it to our flash drive, and make it bootable so our computer can detect it and we can install the operating system. So first and foremost, let's go to System 76. You can bring up your browser and in Google search, just type in System 76. It should be the first option that appears. You want to select Pop! OS. And then obviously select download. Now we have 2 options here. If you have an NVIDIA card in your rig or your laptop, then obviously you want to select the 21.10 build because it does contain the NVIDIA drivers. And if you're like me and you're running an AMD card in your main PC, or maybe you have an Intel APU, then you want to install the standard 21.10 build without the NVIDIA drivers. In this case, however, I'm actually doing this tutorial on my Acer Nitro 5 and it has a 1050 Ti in it, so I'm going to go ahead and grab the NVIDIA driver. So this is going to take a few moments to download, and we'll take a short break. All right, and we're back. So now we've downloaded our ISO image of our operating system. The next step is to download our flashing software. Now, there are a lot of products out there on the market. I personally prefer Balena Etcher. I've used it for quite some time. It works, it's reliable, it's very simple, very easy to use. So if you go to www.balena.io/etcher, and I'll put the link down in the description, obviously, but down here, it will detect your operating system, and go ahead and click download. That was pretty quick. So I'm going to go to my downloads shortcut and install the program. I agree. All right, so now we have Balena Etcher installed. Go ahead and click on it, open it up. So you can see here that we simply select our file, our ISO file, and it automatically detects your thumb drive, your flash drive. If it's not showing up, then click change, and then you can browse for its location. And then, so let's go ahead and click our Pop! OS ISO, hit OK. The flash drive is already detected, and then we'll hit flash. Now this will take several minutes. Not only is it flashing the thumb drive, but it's also going to validate it. So just bear with it, give it a few minutes, and we'll be right back. So our flashing is complete. Our next step will be to install the operating system. All right, now that the flash drive is finished, we need to reboot the computer, and you need to go into the BIOS. So for most of you, it should be simply a matter of tapping on your F2, your F12, or your delete key. If it's not one of those three keys, then you may have to Google your motherboard to find out which key it actually is. So once you're in your BIOS, we need to prioritize reading from the flash drive first. So depending on what BIOS you have, what motherboard you have, you may have to do a little research on that, because unfortunately my Elgato did not capture my reboot, so I'm not able to show that to you. But it's a very simple process, very straightforward. But as long as your flash drive is prioritized as number one, that's what the computer is going to read, and that's what you're going to boot into. So if you've done that successfully and you rebooted, you should boot into Pop! OS installation, and this should be the first screen you see as far as a graphical user interface. So with that said, go ahead and select your language. I'm going to choose United States, and your keyboard defaults. Pick whichever one you want, obviously. I'm going to select default. And now you have some options here, clean install or a custom install, or a refresh install. The custom install is really more for if you want a dual boot. So if you have enough hard drive space to where you can run Windows and dual boot into Linux, you can do that. Or Pop! OS. A clean install just wipes the entire hard drive and installs the operating system on that drive. So for this case, I'm going to go ahead and do the clean install. So I'm just going to hit clean install, obviously. Select my drive, and then hit erase and install. Pick a name. Hit next. Choose a password. Password back in a second time. And encryption. So encryption offers another layer of security. You don't have to select this option. I would recommend it. It does give you an added layer of security. It makes it more difficult for people to get into your system. And we are installing. So this may take a few moments. So we'll go ahead and take a break here and let this do its thing, and we'll be back. All right, so now we're complete, so we'll go ahead and restart the device. So it looks like the installation was successful, so let's go ahead and log in. And everything looks pretty good on my end so far. The Elgato is not quite keeping up. And here we go. So we are now in Pop! OS. So we get to choose our dock. And desktop system, so you can pretty much pick and choose what you want here. And we're gonna skip this for now. Privacy, time zone, New York. So congratulations, you have successfully installed Pop! OS. And for my next video, I'm going to offer 5 recommendations on what I think you should consider doing to improve your Linux experience. So with that said, good job, and I will see you later.